When I first got here to Tulsa, a lot of Unitarian Universalist churches were using as orientation for their new members, not roots and branches, a much better metaphor, but a curriculum called Building Your Own Theology. Now, it's not entirely a wrong-headed idea. In the last analysis, every one of us ultimately has to account for our own personal framework of ultimate meaning and how it shapes our living. Because our assumptions and our hopes, they will show up in our daily lives. But liberal theology, does not have to be do-it-yourself. After all, if we are a little bit more humble and grateful, and remember our forebears, we can remember that they too built frameworks of meaning that were simply more liberating and progressive answers to the old theological questions that the culture had handed down to them. They offered answers that, rather than paying metaphysical compliments to God about controlling everything, emphasized the human responsibility to shape the world in a democratic way. They abolished slavery, struggled to advance the cause of women, established free public education in this land, all because they had a more progressive framework of theology. While we have all too often suffered from the amnesia that is endemic to America and forgotten that we even have one. They did these things because they wanted to restore the heartwood of our faith, which is to realize that in the heart of everyone here and everyone we will encounter through the week, there is a creative potential, as well as a secret struggle and suffering that is the very image of the divine. And it's there in every human heart and soul. We all have a theology, Even the most hardened rationalist who claims not to believe in God, as our hymn implied, doesn't realize that God is not God's name. As my late friend Forrest Church would put it, God is our name for that which is present in each, and yet greater than all. Someone would tell him that they didn't believe in God. Forrest would sit them down and ask for a thorough description of this God they didn't believe in. And usually hear, of course, about a supernatural being who was either too sticky good to be believed in, or more likely, too controlling to be loved. This is the problem with too much conventional theology that doesn't see, as our hymn put it, the dynamic, the moving dynamic of that power with which we are co-creators. For most of the last 30 years, as I think you well know here in Tulsa, the religion spoken of in the media has almost always been the static dogmatizing that comes from the religious right. And even those who try to be fair and balanced, as they put it, are likely then to put up as the alternative voice someone who is, not religious, secular, individualistic, libertarian, and then who disappears out of the picture? Well, all of us gathered here and in many other houses of worship, the real religious majority of this land, those of us who still care passionately about the common good that we're going to leave to coming generations, those of us who are moderate and liberal and progressive and thinking about faith, under whatever denominational name. But Rebecca Parker and I, and Rebecca comes from a Methodist background, and working on our book, A House for Hope, The Promise of Progressive Religion, found that we could present good news. That there is a revival of hope-filled progressive religion that is just beginning to rise up from the grassroots again, and high time. It's transforming younger evangelicals in the direction of the religion of Jesus, as many of them put it, rather than concern for the religion that's all about Jesus. A message we've only been preaching for about 150 years. It's concern for an ethic of environmental stewardship, a gospel of inclusion, if you will, and a deeper compassion for the immigrant stranger and for the poor. What's needed on the part of those of us who are already inheritors of the liberal and progressive tradition in theology is a couple of things. One is to welcome more of them, as you've begun to do here. And the other is to understand our own theological tradition and its framework of meaning more thoroughly and comprehensively so that we can enter more fully into the process that this culture so desperately needs of expanding, renovating, restoring, and renewing the Heartwood of liberal faith in America. For we need to reclaim our place in the public dialogue about ultimate frameworks of meaning that are needed in this land for us to lead lives of hope and faith and love, and for our children and our children's children to do it. Some still think that the best thing to do is to get rid of religion, of course, to which I say, good luck, friend. Just as nature abhors a vacuum, so does the human spirit. Or as Emerson put it, humankind will worship something, be assured of that. The problem is today that too often what people worship in this country is what William James rather bluntly called the bitch goddess success. My parents, who didn't exactly raise underachievers, were pretty good at warning each of their three sons not to become what my mother called a self-made man who does nothing but worship his own creator. Ever met him? The decline of authentic progressive religion in our country has only brought us more of what cultural commentators have aptly called the culture of narcissism, where our land is full of and all too often led by people who worship themselves. I once saw a teenager in a glitzy shopping mall bopping along, listening to his iPod, wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with the memorable slogan, "Only you can prevent narcissism."